Lunaapeewak ni Dashinzi Wabanachu ni Nonjai Nalahi Shuk Nuikian Berry Nawalotman Wundak Tqua. I have the pleasure of co-producing. Performing. No, I've lost my words. Co-presenting, there we go. Co-presenting the next presentation, which highlights some of the research and background information into mask, Nanatis, that is behind the screen, but also some of the masks that are in other places in the world. And this is a presentation that both John and I gave for the Munsee Delaware community back in August in 2 online sessions. But now that we've got everybody here, if you weren't able to make that, you're able to take the information back as well. This is a blend of pictures and things that we saw. There are also some interesting research tidbits that I thought would be interesting for the community. And of course, John and John interrupt me at any time. Their mics are at the ready with anything that needs to be shared. So I don't know where to start with this. The last big house ceremony that is recorded happened at Munsee, Delaware, probably in the 1830s. There was quite a ceremony that existed in the 1820s. We know that because there were several explorers that came. I'm going to say European explorers because southwestern Ontario wasn't all that developed at the time. But there was an Englishman and an Irishman. James Bevan came first, and there was an Irish person that came. And then we had the missionaries come as well. So Peter Jones, and then Reverend Alvin Torrey, who is one of his, I'm going to say compatriots, people that was a Methodist minister at the same time. And it's from their works in the 1820s that we started to learn a lot about what the big house looked like and sounded like, and some of the opinions of Methodist ministers at the time. So the picture here was drawn by James Bevan. It's in a rather obscure text about his travels in southwestern Ontario, which he's not a fond traveler. He has nothing good to say about southwestern Ontario in 1820. It's a really tough slog to get around by horseback. The trails are unfinished, and he kind of feels that it's sort of a backwoods part of the world. So he already comes in with a preconceived notion. But he did draw the big house as part of his illustrations when he stopped in at Munsee, Delaware in the 1820s. And I know John Moses talked about this earlier about the poem, the Delaware Idol. And, there was at one time those posts, those vertical posts, masks on each one of those posts along the outside of the big house. The Bevan goes on to say that someone in the community had taken off the roof at that time to improve their own home. So we're to understand that at this time, there was no ceremonies within the big house. I love this quote because it highlights the reaction of Munsee people to missionaries within our community trying to change things. And this comes from a place of knowledge. So prior to this, about 40 years, Gnadenhutten happened, where there was a massacre of Delaware people in Ohio. And so religion was a very difficult thing for people at Munsee, Delaware to take to, because they'd seen their families, their friends in other communities lose their lives because of religion. And so Alvin Torrey, who was a Methodist minister in Munsee town, was invited to actually come in and view the big house ceremony. And I love the fact that the community gave Alvin cloudy faces. I'll read this because I think it's quite funny, but it also shows that determination and perhaps that the reaction, but also, progress is coming, but we still want to hold on to what's important to us. So Alvin writes, "I now suppose they were through with their pagan worship for the present, but I was informed that they were preparing for another night's worship." So one night wasn't good enough, apparently, in which the devil or bad spirit was to be invoked. In this, they put on false faces, which they called their grandfathers' faces. These made them look very frightful. I said to some nearest me, that no good to worship the devil. This spread like wildfire among the warriors, and in a few moments they put on cloudy faces and showed by their actions and looks that they were much displeased with me for condemning their proceedings. And so I think if I was in the big house watching this go on, something that had been practiced for centuries, for thousands of years, was now, the purview of somebody who is not from the community. And you say rather disparaging comments to a non-appreciative audience. So when you're looking at masks and items that were from the Delaware religion, it's neat to see like reactions from outside the big house and actually being truthful that this person who was an invite received a rather negative response for what they were saying. I think it was Harrington, but it might also be Speck, came to Munsee, Delaware in the early 1900s, about 1907 or 8, and he interviewed Nels Timothy. And Nels Timothy and another man named James Wolfe were listed by Harrington as being traditionalists. So people that believed in a certain way. And he interviewed Nels and asked him about the Big House and the Mask Society. And John Nicholas talked a little bit about the Mask Society this morning. And apparently it originally had 12 members, but by the time in the 1830s and 40s, it had disbanded and dwindled down to 5. And he said sometimes only 2 appeared in costume. The society had a meeting house of its own where it dances. So outside of the big house, that building that James Bevan drew, was also another house where the Mask Society would gather. Members would appear wearing their masks and clad in rough bearskin and deerskin costumes, while some at least were provided with a turtle shell rattle, which they would rub in a long pole, like on for a while. And the mask here at AM&H, and all masks actually, had the turtle shell with the mask. So I mean, there's that whole where the turtle shells haven't been, the rattles haven't been separated from the mask themselves. So we get the recollections from non-Indigenous, well, sorry, I shouldn't say non-Indigenous people, but the majority are non-Indigenous, from the Moravian missionaries. Zeisberger and his compatriots wrote about the fact that people from Moravian town, or Lunaapahkiing, would come up to Munsee to participate in those ceremonies at times, because they're also disparaging. They were worried that people were going to go back to the old ways. The Methodist missionaries, as mentioned, Alvin Torrey, but also Peter Jones. Peter Jones had a much more warm welcome into the big house than Alvin did, because Jones didn't disparage, because he was from New Credit. He was Indigenous himself. We also learned from Charles Half Moon and John Wampum, who are both Munsee, Delaware band members, or they were members from the community. They converted to Methodism in sort of those big conferences in 1820s and 1830s, the big tent revival sessions. And then of course, Mark Harrington, he interviews Nels Timothy and James Wolfe. So which comes to present day, where we're trying to reconnect with ancestors and relatives. And I always look at it this way, that for me, myself, these relatives can teach me language, just as most of the items on those lists have the Munsee words for them. But being in the presence of those that have been around a long time, have that ability then to share with you information that you know, or that they know, right? And these are an illustration of 2 masks by Peter Jones in, I'm going to say the late 1830s, 1840s. There was a conversion, mass conversion, not so much a mass conversion, but there were people that took to the Methodist faith in the 1830s and very early 1840s at Munsee, Delaware. And you can read it in the registries of the Delaware Church in Munsee, but also in the missionaries' records of people who officially got married. One being Henry Logan, who married Mary Huff. Now, Henry was at least 35 years old, probably had been married for some time in the traditional way, but officially, according to the church, was married in 1838. So these masks started to be given up at that time. So people, when they converted, would give them to Peter Jones. And Peter would record them as saying that they had no further use for, while Eunice Hanks was recorded as saying she had no further use of Nanatis because she'd converted to Methodism. And of course, there's lots of things you can read into that, where it's a missionary writing it. I know if someone was that strong and passionate about their religion and culture, I assume that giving that piece up to someone else came with a lot of emotion and probably a lot of regret. I offered this, and I should have done this earlier this morning, but when working with ancestors and relatives that you don't know, and ones that haven't been back to communities, I sought the advice of people who work in Haudenosaunee communities, because they've also had opportunities to repatriate masks that were important to the Hadui, their false faith society. And so they gave some approaches that you should speak the language first, because the ancestors aren't going to know English or French or German. They're going to understand the Munsee language. That you should carry some wampum, should offer tobacco and cedar, and that you should offer these words. So I'm rusty, but I'll say them out loud here. Quinganawal, Kilona, Pato Tawina, Wunsch, Nalahinang, Shukmata, Kwalalat, Kino Kapashwina, Shatel, Wakshandak, Napi, Kapato Tawina, Nakpi, Alangamawat, Wunsch Nalahi, Anishik. And so, doing the Coles Notes compressed version of that, I'm just saying that we're visitors, and I was speaking on behalf of John and myself, that we were visitors coming to share some time with you, the ancestors. I wanted to make sure that they understood that I'm not their keeper, because if they came out behind the glass and they see and hear somebody speaking Munsee, that they're going to want to initially probably believe that I'm their keeper coming back for them. But I wanted to establish that I will also be coming back, or people will be coming back from those communities to visit. So making sure that that relationship stays strong, right? That we're not going to leave them, but that there's going to be visitors that come back with tobacco and gifts for them. So the first mask that I'll present, and this is an opportunity where John Moses can get into, is the mask at the Livingstone Museum in Blantyre, Scotland. So there is one mask there. The mask is part of a large African collection. If you know David Livingstone, he was an explorer, British explorer into parts of Africa. So this entire museum is dedicated to David Livingstone. And of course, all the things that he brought back, pilfered or otherwise, from Africa, and it's in this museum. And one of our masks from Munsee, Delaware is there. So Pabokawai, and I apologize if I did not get that the name correct, the god that crushes or breaks down diseases, according to Jones, is in this museum, and we had an opportunity to visit this. So the mask is, it has I think there are deer hoof rattles around the outside. You'll notice that there's a long stick, and that's that whole rattle. So the rattle is with the mask, and that there's certain design features that may be slightly different than false face or Hadui masks that are very prominent for Munsee masks. Maybe I'll show one more. I'll show that. I'll basically just leave it here for a second, then I'm going to show the next slides. I'm going to stop, and then I'm going to allow my good friends here to step in. There's an interesting thing about the back of the mask that I didn't notice when I first saw it. Maybe I'll be quiet. And John, did you want to add in? Yeah. I'd asked John Nicholas, but John, you weren't there for that one. No, that's right. Yeah.
So yeah, thanks very much for that. And yeah, a couple of things in terms of the, the materials that we're looking at, as Ian indicates, deer hoof rattles surrounding the perimeter of the face, and the wood itself is some sort of a boxwood or basswood. It's tremendously light to pick up. It's I would say only a bit heavier than it would be if it was simply made out of balsa wood, but it's somewhat heavier than that, but still remarkably light. And owing to the fact that it is a boxwood or a basswood, it's quite durable. Now, looking at the image on your right-hand side, the reverse side, and I don't know if this is immediately evident to most people, but we're actually looking at the skinned face of a bear. And I'm assuming that originally the fur was all intact, but it has simply been lost with the passage of time and perhaps with insect infestation. But you'll see that the leather thong comes out of the two eye slits, and you'll notice the nose of the bear at the bottom. And certainly for those of you who heard me speak yesterday, I was talking about the Pauline Johnson story, the Delaware Idol, and I spoke of my father's residential school memoir from the 1940s. But again, the oral history of our small mixed Munsee-Mohican band of Lenape at the Six Nations of the Grand River. The full title of that publication is The Celestial Bear Comes Down to Earth, the Bear Sacrifice Ceremony Amongst the Munsee-Mohican in Canada. And there are likely people who are in this room right now who are much more knowledgeable than I concerning such matters. But the fact that we have the face of the bear paired with the mask itself is quite remarkable. And with the passage of time and with the changing belief systems and political structures and this whole process by which a people becomes divorced from their patrimony or their matrimony, it's all encapsulated right in this single ancestor belonging. As far as I'm concerned, there's so much to deal with here. There's so many things to think about, and I'll just leave it there for now. But in terms of the materials, we're looking at a very light, easily carved boxwood or basswood. It's light to pick up, but it's physically durable. And on the reverse side, the pairing with the face, the very face of the bear that figures within the bear sacrifice ceremony. There's a lot. The only thing I can say is that there's a lot going on here. There's a lot to think about, and hopefully with the fullness of time, we'll gain greater understandings of what exactly we're dealing with here. And I don't know if you wanted to resume, or if John, if you.
Thanks. Something that goes through the mind too is because our time in Canada has been relatively short since 1785, at least on the Thames. One question that goes through my mind when visiting a relative is, did this relative actually come across the Niagara when we came across the Niagara or came across the Detroit River? The carving on the mask as well, the details and the lips and the forehead wrinkles are also something that appears consistently with all of the other masks as well. So it's very, there's the design features are very prominent for the masks. So the second mask that we visited was in a place called Radebeul, Germany. And this mask held some importance for me, and I shared the details with extended relatives of Henry Logan. This mask was given up by the Logan family in 1842, which coincidentally was very shortly after the Logans converted to Methodism. So this was recorded in Peter Jones's diary, History of the Ojibwe Indians. And a little bit of background to that, as many of these were referred to in a book by Michelle Hamilton, who is a professor at the University of Western Ontario. And sorry, I was referring to this with Willow Larson earlier about if you've ever seen the movie American Treasure with Nicolas Cage, where he has to go around and find all these clues. This is kind of similar, where you read something and then you're finding another clue and another clue, and that leads you on to the Karl May Museum in Radebeul, Germany. Courtesy of Suzanne, who did a lot of research here as well, she was able to backdate when the mask came to Scotland, probably, and then was bought by someone working on behalf of the Karl May Museum. If you search Karl May on your phone, you will find that Karl May is a sort of an 1880s fanaticist about the Western and indigenous culture in North America, in a German sense. And many of you probably know that the Germans and many European countries love powwow. They love the Wild West, and Karl May is of no exception. So this mask is in a Wild West museum. I can't describe it any other way, because the first thing that you go into is a cabin with the American flag, and it looks like something out of Davy Crockett or Daniel Boone. And it as an Indigenous person, I'm very conflicted when I go into that place. However, the mask was very well taken care of there. And of course, one thing I tried to do was put my cynicism at the door. I don't know how easy to say this. I'm trying to let myself feel, because this is an item that came from my family, and to just simply close off my skeptical mind, a mind that has been brainwashed in terms of Western education for 53 years. It's not easy to just, okay, I'll feel. I'm in a space where I need to be present with an ancestor. I need to like check what I'm bringing in here. So this is the Logan mask, which I'm sorry, I need bifocal contacts. But if you read the very top of the thing that it's actually resting on, it says Logan Team System. So the people at Karl May were kind enough to bring out the mask for us. You'll see some of the same design features of the forehead wrinkles, the mouth, the copper inserts into the eye holes. I think somewhere it reflect like the reflection off of the fire that would have brought the eyes alive. And of course, we left tobacco with this. So in trying to be present in every space where those masks or where Nanatis has been, this was the only one that I got a feeling that it didn't want us to go. We saw it it was in a basement, right? They'd set it up nicely. That was in a basement of the museum. But this was the only mask that had a pull that I think either enjoyed hearing the language again or enjoyed visiting with people from Delaware communities. I didn't get that from the one in Scotland, and not the one here. And maybe that's that. Maybe it's been visited before. Maybe the others have been visited. This one clearly has not. There's some additional pictures of the turtle shell rattle it came with, and then the side profile of the mask as well. And we left tobacco, and yeah. So maybe I'll stop there, and then if John want to talk.
I was, when we visited the Logan Mask, particularly struck by the power that mask exuded on me, particularly anyway, because it took me back to stories that I'd heard growing up as a child about the masks, the false faces, and the role that they played in the community. And I immediately felt that connection and the power exuded by the mask. I can imagine this mask looking back at me if I had said or done something that was frowned upon. toward another member of the community, the power that this mask would have had on me uh, in front of all my friends and relatives at the Strawberry Moon Festival. I got a chance to pick it up, and I was amazed at how light the material was the mask was formed from. And I can imagine the wearer of the mask had to have something light that was not so cumbersome. And of course, the rattle may have been the same rattle that accompanied the mask when the mask was first formed. So anyway, that was what struck me about this mask. And again, I had spoken earlier about the role of the False Face Society in the community earlier today. So anyway, that's just a few thoughts.
And I do have some prepared remarks I'd like to share with everybody too. But as Ian already alluded to, and John has mentioned previously too, the possibility or the appropriateness of undertaking necessary scientific analysis to find out what the particular variety of wood is. Perhaps it's a variety or a species that is more indigenous to this area as opposed to Upper Canada or the modern day province of Ontario. But whether it's for the ancestor objects, the ancestor belongings that are overseas or that are in this room with us this afternoon, I think it would be a worthwhile exercise to undertake necessary testing to determine age and point and species of origin as well. So I just wanted to put that out there. Others might have different views concerning that, but as far as my work in the museum field goes, I did start off as an artifact conservator, so I'm always very concerned or very interested in materials and how they age over time and the different changes that can happen. But anyways, that aside, I just wanted to offer my written reflections on the tour that we had, the trip that we had in June. It was my privilege in June of 2025 to accompany my colleagues, John Nicholas, Munsee Delaware Nation, Ian McCallum, Munsee Delaware Nation, and Suzanne Conklin-Akberry Institute for Advanced Studies on a Mellon Foundation funded research trip to view, visit with, and pay respects to important Lenape ancestor belongings residing in museums near Berlin, Germany, and Edinburgh, Scotland, and to review their associated museum archival and catalog records. The museums in question comprise the storage facility of the State Ethnological Museum in Dahlem, the Karl May Museum in Radebeul, the Humboldt Forum Museum in Berlin, and finally, the David Livingstone Birthplace Museum in Blantyre, south of Edinburgh, Scotland. We also had the privilege of attending one day of the Global Cultural Assembly at the Humboldt Forum in Berlin, which was coincident with our visit. So I wish to thank our organizer, Susan Akberry, and our sponsor, the Mellon Foundation, for that extraordinary opportunity, the possibility of which I had not previously envisioned. Now, in the case of John Nicholas, Ian McCallum, and myself, and for the majority of us in the room today, our common ancestors are the Lenape or the Delaware. For context, and as you all know, the Lenape were the Native North Americans who were and are indigenous to much of the territory now comprising the present-day states of New York, New Jersey, Delaware, Pennsylvania, and contiguous areas. Our people were already widely being dispersed during the earliest decades of European colonization and settlement across the North American Northeast, and our earliest European contacts were with the Dutch, the English, and the Swedes. Today, there are Lenape communities to be found as far afield as Kansas, Oklahoma, Wisconsin, and our 3 present-day communities in Southern Ontario and Canada. There are also some state-recognized or self-identified Lenape groups to be found remaining in the original homeland called by some Lunaapahkiing. Now, notwithstanding our common ethnic and linguistic roots in the broadest sense, each surviving Lenape community today comprises a unique subculture in its own right, with a distinct history, and within each community, different extended families and lineages over the generations have resorted to different strategies in responding to the stresses of colonization, settlement, and assimilation, and indeed cultural genocide, when one considers outright massacres like Nadenhouden, or the multi-generational legacies over time of the system of residential schools and boarding schools in both Canada and the United States, and what these have entailed in terms of loss of language, heritage, and cultural practices, including, as we see here, the traditional Lenape spiritual and religious complex called the Big House. The June 2025 research trip to view and pay respects to Lenape ancestor belongings presently resident in these museums in Germany and Scotland has been hugely transformational for me on both a personal level as a Six Nations Munsee-speaking band member, and professionally as an Indigenous person who's working within the museums and heritage field. The stories of these ancestors' own journeys through time and across oceans, national boundaries, and generations represents in microcosm the means by which important ancestor belongings, once owned in common, might become perceived as family heirlooms and ultimately depart from their territories and cultures of origin altogether. Conversely, the recent research trip inspires hope and suggests a spectrum of possibilities for Indigenous reconnection and Indigenous engagement in the future. It's important to realize that just as natural resources have been removed from within traditional Indigenous territories for resale and consumption within Western markets, and just as Indigenous children have been removed from their families and communities for the purposes of assimilation in residential schools and boarding schools, so too have cultural resources comprising ancestor belongings been removed to museums and related institutions globally to be assigned new values and meanings that would have perhaps mystified their creators. Hence the calls today for land back, children back and accounted for, and Indigenous ancestor belongings back. I would also draw everyone's attention to the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe dish with one spoon wampum belt accord as a metaphor for this concept of sustainability, including in the realm of cultural resources. All shall have access to shared resources in a collective sense, but it's the responsibility of each individual person to conduct themselves such that no one person ever consumes the last remaining portion of any given resource in whatever sense. So this, in summary, this underscores the need to be vigilant and diligent in questioning who gets to speak on whose behalf regarding representations of indigeneity in the museum and gallery space, and questioning whose values and assumptions inform decision-making processes, whether for individual ancestor belongings and works of art, or for entire monuments, historic sites, and cultural landscapes. Finally, how do we decolonize, indigenize, and unsettle existing institutions while setting in place the conditions necessary for brand new Indigenous-led cultural spaces of the future? And I wanted to, I don't usually do this. I wanted to write something, or I wanted to share with you something I wrote. I guess you would call it a poem, but I was just trying to sort out my feelings in the days and weeks following the trip in June, is to try to make sense of all these different impressions that we had been receiving. Both Ian and John have described the power that we could feel emanating from the masks, and this is something that occurred to me, and if you indulge me, I'd like to share it with you now. It's called The Ancestor in the Vault, and it relates specifically to the story of the destruction of the Big House at Six Nations of the Grand River. It was in about 1850, in the judgment of the elders, that something happened. It was an attack on our people and our belongings and our ideas. Some people came among us and some things were taken. Some people had stepped forward to set things down to show how important they were. But when they turned back round, those things had been taken. Some words have been spoken but misunderstood, or else the listeners did not hear those things that had been said. There's a red-winged blackbird called Teoqualis flying through the skies of time. She darts about up and down, soon to return home forever. When will my people come for me? Why have they left me here in the dark? No, I don't want them to come for me. I am angry at them. Why, how could they ever let me go? What happened that night so long ago? I don't understand what went on. All I remember is the shouting and the confusion and the anger and the fear and the sadness, and then the sound of chopping wood and the smell of burning torches. So anyways, I'll stop there. Thank you for indulging me, and Anushik for your time. Thank you.
Nishik, John, you put it in a poetry form, which I don't think I could ever do. That was really nice. Thank you. I think that the next two items deal with items that are present with us. I'm going to stop saying them items. They're relatives and ancestors. They're with us today. And that's the first one is the mask that's behind the screen. Again, collected by Peter Jones from Munsee, Delaware. And most of you have seen it up close. But again, this presentation was designed for Munsee, Delaware, and in the community updates in August. So I wanted to make sure that the pictures were good and clear. This mask, both Rihanna Snake and Rose Snake helped me coming down in June of this year to support the work with this piece and also Nanatis. At this point, if I remember the notes correctly, we don't know what family this is associated with. We've got one that's associated with the Nicholas family from Munsee that has not been found yet. There's one for the Logan family that's been found. And then the one in Scotland has no family specifically yet attached to it, and neither does this one. But research is always good, and there's young people who are on a tour right now who would love to do some research because their eyes are better than mine. So, part of it is to maybe encourage the next generation to sort of take up the torch in terms of their energy and time to maybe find some details as well. And this one was mislabeled as an Ojibwe mask here at the museum, but with the help of Suzanne, with the help of the museum, we were able to readdress where it came from, and it's now. When I talk to people about this, I'm like, we found 3 of 4 masks that are well over 100, well, it could be 200 years old if they came from the United States to Canada. He found 3 of 4. That's quite incredible, right? It's like, should be a movie about it. It probably is. That's the last mask that we're looking for. So if anybody knows or anybody's read some information about it, this mask is the Munsee idol, delivered again up by Joe Nicholas on his conversion to Christianity. It was recorded by Peter Jones. And again, if these masks had been in your family for generations and it was your responsibility to feed the mask, take care of the mask, you are part of a mask society for the Munsee people, this isn't given up just on a whim, right? So I know that these families who gave them up, the people, the men that gave these up, no doubt had their misgivings long after this about what was lost. There was one wampum belt on our trip as well that I'll mention as well. This wampum belt is in the Ethnological Museum, as John mentioned, in Berlin, Germany. Oh, you know what? I forgot. Did you guys want to talk about the mask? I'm just jumping ahead. Okay. This was a wampum belt that was found in, not found, but it's in the Ethnological Museum in Berlin, Germany. There are 2 that require a visit. So the one in Germany, and there's one in St. Petersburg in Russia. For obvious reasons, that one is not available because of the war in Ukraine. But just so everybody's aware, this is another mask that is This is another belt that is connected with the Munsee, Delaware community. It is a rather long belt. I've made a copy of it for the community so that exists when we have a place to put it, but it's rather long. rather narrow, and it has sort of three diamond-shaped patterns on it. And there's the doctors, John and Dr. John, doing what was it called? A wampumectomy or something. I shared that, but yes, you can sort of get that sense of how long it is in front of John Moses there. And again, we offered tobacco to the ancestor. This is a piece that I'm not sure what it means, right? As much as you can find these items, the actual meaning behind them is yet another chapter that needs to be discovered. Did you guys want to talk about that? Yeah. Thanks, John.
What I was particularly struck by when we had a chance to examine these belts was not so much these belts in particular, but things that I had been told about belts. Most folks realize that wampum belts were used to commemorate important events or agreements. And that's one use for the belt. But also, probably an even more important use for the belt was to commemorate the passage of time, one generation to the next. My father would tell a story about when traditionally a hereditary chief passed away, there would be a ceremony held. And the purpose of the ceremony was to begin a remembrance of who we are, where we come from. They would, each generation, starting not with the one that passed away, but his predecessor, they would start with that belt, and they would read that belt in front of everyone in the community. And when they were finished with that belt, it would be passed out and stored away, and the next belt would come for the previous generation. Each generation was represented by at least one belt. And in some cases, there may have been enough events occurred in the passage of time within that generation to necessitate two or more belts. And so during the course of this ceremony, it would take nonstop reading of each generation's belt, 9 days and 9 nights of constant reading. Can you imagine what that was like to sit there and listen? And this happened only once a generation, where the passage of time was marked by the construction of these belts, which today we don't know where they are. We know that they existed at one time. And I guess the challenge for us is to keep our eyes open and ears open. Perhaps clues will make themselves known. So anyway, that was what struck me about these belts, and my thoughts went back to that as I was looking down upon these particular belts. That would be in the big house. Yes. And then the belts would all be stored back away, and they would be kept by the people who were designated in the community for constructing the belts. And the elders were the ones who decided what events occurred within a generation would be memorialized in the belt. So.
And I just wanted to mention things too, and this isn't in no way, in no way is it inconsistent with what John Nicola has just stated, but the notion of the recurring icons or symbols that we see represented in belts over time, and I think they really are metaphors that can span the generations and connect generations one with the other. And it's the notion of our relationships with ourselves. And four recurring design motifs are the fire, the path, the chain, and the prop. And just in terms of our interpersonal relationships, I think it's easy for most of us to relate to things in terms of our relationship with one person to another person, or perhaps one community's relationship with another community or another group of communities. Is, are we inspired by them? Is there, is this a metaphor for the notion of the fire? Or are we talking about the chain? Or are we talking about the path or the prop? So just very briefly, as we can see in the belts illustrated here, that happen to be within our view here, any representation, whether it's a hexagon or square or diamond shape, according to the understandings that I've achieved over time and the teachings that have been passed on to me, any representation of that is a metaphor for the notion of the fire, meaning a particular community of people or a particular settlement in a geographic sense. Next, after the fire, comes the notion of the path, which is typically rendered as a single, undulating line to denote this notion of movement and of transportation, of transit over the landscape. So we've got the fire, the path, and then the chain is typically a single or sometimes two parallel straight lines, denoting in some of the political examples I'm thinking of right now with the Covenant Chain Wampum Belt or the two-row wampum belt, the notion of, in terms of the original five and then later Six Nations Confederacy relationship with the British Crown, this notion of trading and economic partnerships in peacetime and of military alliance in war. So that's three. We've got the fire, the path, the chain, and then the fourth and final one is the prop, which is typically rendered as a diagonal line, and it signifies the notion of adopting in or of expanding outward, such that we're expanding the rafters of the longhouse or of the dwelling. And so I just wanted to leave that with you as well. Perhaps some of you have different understandings of what the recurring symbols are, but that's what I've been exposed to over the years, the notion of the fire, the path, the chain, and the prop. So thank you. Yeah. And I don't know, John Nicholas, if you have insights concerning that?
But the only thing I might add about that would be, as I mentioned, certain people were given responsibility, care and maintenance of themselves. They would have known what they said, because they chose the symbols that would be used to commemorate events in the passage of time. And just as we now have lost touch with the belts, we've lost touch with the people who made the belts and stored and kept them.
Yeah.
So the short answer is no. There's no way, if you see a belt, to say this is where it fits in the scheme of our history. It's a sad state, but that's the way it is.
Yeah. And I would just indicate too that within the original Five Nations Confederacy and later the Six Nations, one of the hereditary titles amongst the Onondaga was Hono Wanado, which is the keeper of the wampum. And so there were, as John was explaining, there were people that was their purpose, that was their calling. These were the people who were specifically trained up to be the record keepers and the holders of this kind of traditional Indigenous knowledge. And, you know, I'd made that reference before about natural resources leaving territories and children leaving families and communities to be sent to the residential schools. And so too with the ancestor belongings leaving communities to wind up in museums and other repositories around the world. Part of what's lost is that the physical object, the ancestor in the physical sense, is not the only thing that's lost. What's also often lost is that the traditional Indigenous knowledge and the intangible heritage values that are embedded in that. And I would suggest too the specific linguistic terms, like you know the names for the particular raw materials, and then also perhaps the songs and ceremonies and chants that are recited as the raw materials are being harvested, as they're being manipulated into the finished ancestor object itself. None of this was done in isolation. It was always done with appropriate words of ceremony and ritual. So quite aside from the physical object itself being lost to the community, so is all that embedded knowledge lost as well. And perhaps that's our challenge for this generation and beyond, is to try and, now that we're getting a better handle on where the physical objects reside, trying to reinvest that traditional Indigenous knowledge, if such a thing is possible. So, thanks.
I always think too that sometimes the ancestors or relatives wanted these items to be found again at the most appropriate time to share their knowledge. And I think about the GJ belt over there that Jacob had the foresight when it was bought from him in 1908, that he wanted that belt available to the Munsee Delaware people should there be a time where they need it for their land. And that's what he told Harrington, and that's what Harrington wrote with the item when it came to the museum. So there's some people had that forethought that I'm doing something that's breaking my heart here. I have to give something up to like someone who's offering me a lot of money, but I wanted to make sure that it's available for my community should they need that in the future. Brings me to the last ancestor, which is Nanatis or Nanates, that resides here at the American Museum of Natural History. And I should have updated my slides. I was in such a panic last week of just trying to get everything transferred over to PowerPoint that I should have updated with pictures with Rose and Rihanna, because of course, as a man, I didn't feel confident that this is a sphere that I should be working in. Because Nanatis, the guardian of health, was something that was very important for certainly women in our community, that they were instructed to create these in order to support the health of their families. And unlike the masks, which arguably are part of a society that work to support the health of the community as well, we've learned a lot about Nanatis through the recordings of Mark Harrington and other anthropologists in terms of what Nanatis needed on a yearly basis. So in this case, Eunice Hank from Munsee would have had to feast the doll every year, sacrificing a deer, and as well as giving presents on a yearly basis. And we can only conjecturize that those little metal things that are on the front of her outfit might constitute gifts. She's also got the leggings or the rectangular squares of clothing as well that have been given with her that Eunice would have given to Peter Jones. And in order to keep that relationship, Rose, Rihanna, and myself gave the Nanatis some wampum on behalf of the community when we were down last time. Eunice also had a Munsee name. So both her and her husband, James, who took on James and Eunice probably when they converted to Methodism, had Munsee names. So Pashikok was Eunice's Munsee name. It tells you a few things in that prior to this, Eunice probably did not practice Methodism or Christianity, that she was very much a part of the Big House religion. The doll comes with some fairly big warnings. So Albert Anthony's actually from Grand River. He's a Munsee. He might have been Munsee Mohican from there, but he talked about the doll feast. The doll needed to be feasted every year. If you do not do this, bad things will happen to your family. And he wrote about it in I'm going to say this is either the late 1800s or early 1900s. So we have the information that not only were you to give gifts to Nanatis, but there was actually a feast involved as well. And a little bit more information from Mark Harrington. He talks about, he talked to James Wolfe, and James Wolfe talks a little bit about if, this person was lying sick, the family was instructed by the medicine person for the community to create a doll in order to provide that health for the community or for that person. And feeding the doll was part of that through gifts, through the ceremony, through the sacrifice of the deer. And these pictures are wildly out of date, but what I'll draw your attention to is when Rose and myself were down, it took 5 guys to take the glass off the case that it was in. This glass meant business, and it was an inch thick, and like I'm wider than my arms. It sounds like I'm catching a fish, but it was like huge glass, and it hadn't been out of the case in, I don't know, since the 1960s, I'm assuming, whenever the display was built. And Rose was so very helpful in removing Nanatis from the wall. And sorry, Velma was there as well. So Velma provided that guidance as well, amongst others. Just some other pictures as Nanatis appeared in different drawings. So one with the Peter Jones on the far right, and the picture of Nanatis when she was potentially given to the museum here, and then present day. And I believe that's it. Yeah. John, did you want to add? Okay. Rose, did you want to add too, or Velma, did you want to add to that? Because you were present for the removal of Nanatis.
When we were here for that, I remember a long time ago knowing that there was a Delaware doll ceremony that went with this, and that there was a song sung for it. And I remember hearing this song, but I didn't know where that recording was. So I mentioned it to Ian. Hey, I remember hearing about this song that was sung for the ceremony. Anyway, I found it. So I went through stuff that I hadn't. And so yesterday, actually before I came here, I found it. So I'll see if I can send it. But so what he does is he talks about that ceremony, and it's a gentleman who's singing it, and he has a shaker. So you can hear him. He'll explain what he's going to do, and then he'll sing a little bit, and then he'll stop, and then he'll explain it a little bit more. So he did that recording to teach about that ceremony, what it was for. So I have that. So I don't know where I got it.
When I was asked to help remove her from the wall, the feeling was so emotional that everything, but they said, handle care, don't drop it, don't do this, don't. So I told them, I just quit breathing. I just took her, and it felt so good to take her off that wall where she had a spike through her and on the wall, and to put her in a box they have made for her, to lay her down. It's the first time she'd laid down in so many years. It was such a very emotional time. I had to breathe in and not breathe so I wouldn't react the way I was feeling. So it was I have a very special feeling towards her now. So
Nishik Rose for sharing and Nishik Velma for finding that song too. I'm interested in that. Opportunity to ask any questions. Both John, Rose and I have talked for some time, but now's your opportunity to ask the burning question that you have, or forever hold your peace. No, one or two. Oh, I've been for sure. Oh, Julie. Okay, all right. I guess I've been limited to just one or two questions. The rest of the burning questions you can always ask too.
I just talk loud. Okay. My question is, are there any wampum readers in any Lenape communities still, or not, or like descendants of that family? Like, are there people that have that knowledge still, or not really?
I could only refer to the Dolsons, and because that's the only wampum belt that I know that I can, or that we can actually say this belonged to them. So I can only ask them. I don't know. Yeah, Crystal's giving me the head shake. But like John said, I mean, it's such a responsibility too, right? And so when they left, and you skip generations that don't have access to it, it just becomes hard.
She.
Questions back.
I have a doll that was given to me, and I was surprised. It's red and black. It's red and black, and it has the same beadwork that's down there.
Is that right?
Yes,
Wow.
it was given to me about 8 years ago.
Oh, jeez.
So where was this doll taken off of? What wall?
It was an exhibit on the main floor, and the museum staff would have to help me here. It was on the main floor of this museum. It was called the Eastern Woodlands exhibit, right? Yeah. So I think when you turn, and I get lost in here, there's a Lenape greeting the Dutch on a wall at one of the entrances. And you turn down that hallway, it's no longer on display because of, it's, I'm going to lose, but correct me if I'm wrong. Go ahead, Katie. Yeah, you'll be able to explain this way better than I can.
Hey, so the Eastern Woodlands and Plains Halls have both been closed at the museum. This was partially in response to the revised NAGPRA regulations that were issued that require institutions to consult on items that are on display that may meet a NAGPRA category. And the best way to know if something meets a NAGPRA category is to consult. So as a matter of precaution and respect, those halls were closed. We know more consultation is needed. I think many people also felt like the halls just need to be re-examined and refreshed for other reasons too. So yes, Nanatis was on display for many years in Eastern Woodlands. And I believe she was in a case about woodworking of all things, with other items. So, obviously not an appropriate way to display her or an appropriate context. And yes, we're happy to work with Ian and others to, better understand a path forward.
Yeah, the question is, what were the dolls made out of? So I believe, and I haven't done a really big examination, but I believe they're carved with clothing on top. Is it okay? Yeah, I believe. And Rose, am I right? It's carved. It's carved wood. Yeah. 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 So it's carved wood. Maybe it's the same stuff that the masks are made. I don't know. Yeah. Something that's nice and easily carved. I don't know. Yeah. Oh, right. Body had corn husk. Right. Okay. No. Reluctantly. Oh.
So when the Delaware doll
Oh,
song Okay. Would you tell us a little bit about the Delaware Doll song? Like, was it used in ceremony? What do we know about it? Thanks.
I don't know anything personally about it because Velma would know. I've never heard it.
Yeah. No, I know you said you had it, but like, right. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Cool.
Okay, at this point, I'm going to extend a big thanks to my co-presenters, John Nicholas and John Moses, and Suzanne for carefully trucking us around different places in Europe and being our guide and making sure we got on the right train and subway. It is my pleasure to welcome up a cousin of mine who's going to lead us through a presentation upcoming here in, not up here, in Southern Ontario. So please welcome Julie Tucker.
Komosi kunganawalomwa ni Dushinzi Julie Ray Tucker wak ni no Giai no Lahi Shuknawikian Wabiatanang Windsor, Ontario no Walotaman Wendak Takwa ni Lunaapawi. Hi everyone, my name is Julie Ray Tucker. I'm from Munsee, Delaware First Nation. I follow the ways of the turtle. I'm a Lenape person. Currently, I am head of programs and projects at Art Windsor, Essex, the largest art gallery in Southwestern Ontario. So today I'm going to give you a preview of the exhibition that I'm working on with Vanessa Dion Fletcher. So Wanha Nino Joe's Vanessa Dion Fletcher. This meme was chosen by her wife Colette. It's Slimy from Sesame Street. And Vanessa's bouncing around a feeding symposium in Thunder Bay, so that's why she can't be with us. Vanessa is a Lenape and Potawatomi neurodiverse artist. Her family is from Lunaapahkiing, displaced from Lunaapahkiing and European settlers. She uses porcupine quills, wampum belts, and menstrual blood to reveal the complexities of what defines a body physically and culturally. Reflecting on an Indigenous and gendered body with a neurodiverse mind, Dion Fletcher primarily works in performance, textiles, and video. She graduated from the School of Art Institute of Chicago in 2016 with an MFA in performance and a Bachelor of Fine Arts. So I just wanted to read her bio since she's not here to speak for herself. I wanted to share a really cool update to start with. This work pictured here, A Return Home, was commissioned for the book that Mary Jane wrote, and I wrote the afterword for Needleoak. And you can see it's in The Hague as part of the Canadian Global Affairs collection. And on the right is our Prime Minister, Mark Carney, and Swedish PM Ulf Kristersson met before the 2025 NATO summit. So it's really significant, I think, that a Lenape artist is in this, national, international summit. So our Prime Minister, even though he's an economic background, apparently he knows the value of arts and culture. And he likes to stand in front of art. I don't know if anyone's noticed. So yeah, this work, we also, the Munsee Delaware History and Language group, so this is an addition work. So we also actually own a copy of this. So it's in my office in Windsor. So I'm talking about the show Big Doll, Watananatis. And I think this was really, I think we named this because dolls were kind of all around us. And we were gifted a doll last year, and we were really looking forward to meeting this ancestor. Vanessa and I have been learning HULUNIIXSUWAAKAN, the language of the Lenape in the Munsee dialect. I like to say thank you to Suzanne and Melissa for organizing this conference. It has been such an amazing opportunity to be able to meet with language learners And we were really brought together by Karen Aya and many of the people that were in that Zoom class for the around 2020. We've all been able to meet at this conference every year. So I think she really is with us when we're gathering here. This is an actual picture of me and Vanessa. I'm SpongeBob. So about the exhibition, and Velma had made a point, I think it was yesterday, I'm not sure how time works, but thinking with your heart and not your head. Big Doll is an exhibition that shows the process of making and creating from the heart. This exhibition is both profoundly personal and collaborative, open to audience of all ages in the design of an artwork. Dion Fletcher is inviting us to reflect on how our education systems are limiting our creativity. Our minds and bodies and hearts are not uniform. We bruise when forced into prescriptive learning models. This is a quote from a colleague of Mary Jane's, actually, Kathy Mattis. Beadworking and, I added doll making here, are cultural practices meaningful to Indigenous teaching and learning. She calls them a cultural continuance where beads helped produce and transmit knowledge. So when Vanessa told me she wants to make giant earrings, I thought of this meme. When you're the antiest auntie who ever antied. Jackie is a good example of that. This kind of looks like Marla, your sister, a little bit. And yeah, it looks like Marla, but like, just I remember like the 80s and 90s, they had like the big hair with the industrial cans of hairspray. So when Vanessa shared that she was teaching kids to bead using pool noodles, as I said, this meme came to mind. And I thought, like, I think I was like thinking that idea of like big and expansive and making a space that really kids would love. As part of the exhibition, I'm adding these carpet tiles and in kind of a style of like a Minecraft floor. So kids will be able to like kind of climb on things, and they'll be able to touch these giant earrings that I'll be showing you next. I was also thinking a lot about the book, A Council of Dolls by Mona Susan Power. It's a work of historical fiction that explores the lives and experiences of 3 generations of Dakota women as they confront forces aimed at erasing their cultural identity. Each character has a doll that converses with them throughout the book. I just wanted to read you a quote from this book. If languages are alive and have a spirit, then English is my boss, while Dakota is more like a nice dream. It's hard to remember. All you know is that something about it made you happy. I'm gonna pass this book around. Vanessa shared this quote with me by Greg Stotts. He's a Haudenosaunee artist that she is friends with. Creativity is our tradition. And when I was thinking, when she told me she was thinking about this as we're, this exhibition evolves. So as part of the exhibition, so she's made these pool noodles, and I said it would be, she's had them documented before and in Toronto, where they hosted a huge like outdoor pool party with a DJ, and all of her pool noodles were just like in this giant pool, and people were just chilling, having fun on these pool noodles. So she decided to host a pool party at our condo, and so invited friends and family over. And these photos will be in the exhibition. The process of beadwork is an entirely small and intimate act. Dion Fletcher makes her beadwork big so that Indians can understand how it's made, but also imagine the other worlds that this big beadwork could exist, illuminating the process of active learning so that others may join in. So I'm just going to quickly go through some photos. Sorry. I just wanted to point out there's different styles. So this is like a door knocker style. One of my favorites, that is a star shape. And this is another one that she's just in the process of making. It looks like a really cool like serpent. Also in the exhibition, there is going to be a mural installed. So this is just a mock-up of that mural. So over the course of the exhibition, we will be working with kids on bead patterns from public schools, and they will each be painting a little section of the pattern onto the mural. So the mural's about 30 feet long, 15 feet high, and throughout the exhibition, there'll be moments where she guides she's guiding people through the process of making her artwork. So as you can see at the top of the mural, she shows the process of doing a brick stitch. And I just want to show a little bit of the quill work that's in the exhibition. If you could hold the video, sorry. She's quilled the alphabet. Next slide. And then we're going to talk about the big doll because there is a doll. Well, this is the big doll in process. You can see on the left, those quill work that you saw earlier is pierced into the doll. So, and on the right, you can see that she also does performance. You can see her wearing the skin of the doll, for lack of a better term. There's also a sound component. Vanessa did a residency with some colleagues of mine, Vibratory Fusion Lab. They create accessibility devices for folks who are deaf or hard of hearing so that they can experience arts and performances fully. And they also assist artists in making work that is more broadly accessible. So you can feel you'll be able to touch the doll. You can feel the vibration of the text being read. She uses transducers that are playing off a looped cassette tape. And the text that she uses is her grade 9 psychological assessment, as well as a 1923 article, The Mental Capacity of Southern Ontario Indians. Both texts strive to report students' cognitive abilities through percentile scores on a series of intelligent tests. And my connection to this is through my mom, who was a special education teacher on Walpole Island. And at some point, as she had gotten her, she was I guess whatever they call it, expert in that field. But she went on to do her Master's of Native Education at the University of Western. And a lot of what she found was exactly what Vanessa found, which was a lot of pseudoscience and racist texts about Indigenous people. And so my mom had told me to read this book, Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire. And I'm just going to read you a quote from that, and then you can pass that around. Because again, it's about language. The words of his own class, so she's talking about the oppressors. The words of his own class come to be the true words, which he imposes or attempts to impose on the others. The oppressed, whose words have been stolen from them, those who steal the words of others develop a deep doubt in their abilities of the other and can consider them incompetent. And then I would also like to talk about another inspiration. It's just the same slide. Is in the memoir Keeper of the Delaware Dolls. I'm not sure if everyone has also picked up this book. I'll pass around. So Lynette Perry, the author, she talks about is a memoir, and she talks about the responsibility within her community of caring for dolls as a woman of the Turtle Clan, who had the power to nurture and the power to heal, she said. The two women, her mother and grandmother, lived with they call them the Otas, as if they were family, taking care of them. Her grandmother decided not to pass on the responsibility of the dolls to her daughter, which Lynette's mother, who lost them, felt the pain of their absence for her whole life. And she writes, on giving up the dolls, when Grandma Mahoney, despairing of the future, had her dolls buried with her, I think she misjudged the world. The legacy of many centuries is not so easily disposed of. Cultures are more resilient, traditions has a stronger hold on us. For all the styles and that change, the buried dolls come back in a different form to lend their healing power to our new generations. We are each of us in our own way, my daughter, spiritual heirs of Keeper of the Delaware Dolls. And just going back to that quote from Kathy Mattis on cultural continuance, we might be using different materials and references like in our artwork, but I think artists have a special responsibility or special role in the community. Artists, makers, you may not consider yourself an artist, but you know, being connected to our beautiful things, our beadwork. This is by Donna Noah. The shirt, which is Aki, which is based on the artwork by Susan Blight, who's a Anishinaabe. They also use the word for Aki for land. I think, you know, they really help us carry on those traditions. If you would like to come to the gallery, we are doing an artist talk with Vanessa on November 20th at 7:30. So you're all invited. We also will be doing classes with kids to work on beading patterns throughout the exhibition, to do murals. Would love some schools from reserve to be able to come. We're doing a zine making workshop and a pool noodle making workshop. And I was hoping to host a pool party with two LGBTQ folks and our allies. So, Anishik, oh, this is my slide. Anishik Minkwich. Oh yeah.
We have time for a couple questions. If people.
Thank you for describing the show, which I think is going to be really amazing. There's such a difference between the kind of historical way and the material way that Nanitas was being talked about a little bit earlier, and then the big doll of the exhibition. But I can see a relationship in how that's what it means to take a doll into the future. And I wonder if you could talk about that, because I know you're very knowledgeable about both aspects of that. And I wonder if you could talk about what it's like connecting the past and the future.
I don't know, Suzanne. Yeah. I don't know. I don't see like I don't see like a difference. Like I don't think we ever stopped doing the things, like practicing our culture. It was maybe like it was hidden, but it's still there and for us to pick up. I don't know. I think that we want to be seen as contemporary people, right? And so I think that's what like art is able to show the people, you know, the Canadians or Americans who we are. But I think it's, you know, when I'm creating an exhibition or when I'm doing work, I really think about who my audience is. And so I stated it was kids, but I would also say that we make work for our community and that when kids visit the gallery, they'll see themselves in it. If they come from Munsee or Caldwell or Wapule. I don't know if that answers your question.
Hi, my name's Emily. I do strategic planning here at the museum, and thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge with us today and letting us be here with you. I'm really struck by the maybe not even a juxtaposition, but a continuum between things that feel very serious and are very serious and require a lot of respect in their approach, and this very like real playfulness that you're talking about that is sort of a continuation of your question of what I'm really struck seeing children like playing with the pool noodles, literally being buoyed up by a representation of beading and connecting to their culture in that way. I don't know that there's a question exactly embedded in here other than how do you approach things very seriously with respect and also make them accessible and fun and playful, because people are more than one thing, right? All cultures have play and they all have respect and very like the seriousness and the playfulness, this sort of like interplay just feels very tangible in the room today. So I wonder if you could comment on that.
I would also like to add, we're gonna have a floaty pile in the middle of the room, a floating island. Again, this is all in my head. I still, I think how I think about this exhibition will change as I get to spend more time with it and it, it actually comes to fruition. But I think that a lot of time has been spent talking about our trauma. And so, like the exhibitions I've worked in the past, like one was about Mount Elgin Residential School. And so it was, a very serious exhibition. And there was a lot of like ethical responsibilities I felt to survivors, that from Munsee to my family members, and also to, the elders I work with in Wawiatinong. But I think that like putting joy forward, I don't think that discounts all of the seriousness that is connected to it. And, right now I'm still Vanessa was able to meet the doll in September. This is my first time like meeting the doll. So there's a lot I'm still like processing currently about that. But, I think be able to like, going forward with like love and joy, I think is healing. And I think like some of the text I shared as well, the Council of Dolls, which it seems like it's informed by the memoir, the Delaware doll, like now that I think about it, is also, I felt really healing as a way to think through repatriation of our cultural belongings. And I think, I think like they were taking them away from us was a way to really cause a lot of harm and pain to our communities.
Just wanted to comment too, it's not necessarily so much about a concept of playfulness perhaps, but we've all heard of the flight response and the fight response. I'm also convinced that there's a humor response as well, and I've noticed that over the generations too, just what I've observed within my own immediate family and the extended family and everything else like that, and also in my own father's residential school memoir that he wrote in 1965, in which he recalls his residential school upbringing at the Mohawk Institute from 1942 to 1947. It's not an especially long document. You can find it online by Googling Russ Moses residential school memoir, but it's like, I don't know, 5 or 6 pages. But within that, there are these little flashes, almost like flashes of lightning. It's like humor coming through, where he it was true throughout his life. He had an appreciation of irony and of the absurd. And I think this is something that helped him. It was one of his own survival mechanisms. So thanks.